I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked. If you're seeking to live your full potential, this show is for you, because this is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. And speaking of choices, I'm delighted that you chose to be with us. Our topic today is the SMART mission. You know, one of the characteristics of highly resilient people is that they have in-depth knowledge in some area. That means that they're learning new things all the time. Definitely related to that other characteristic of highly resilient people, which is insatiable curiosity. Now, if I translate in-depth knowledge into a corporation, guess what? Highly resilient organizations also have in-depth knowledge because they're learning new things all the time, and they encourage curiosity. Now, I haven't talked a lot on this show about how to improve your learning, and I will in the future. But today, we're going to talk about how an organization can deepen its knowledge simply by facilitating the sharing of knowledge among staff and even with experts outside. But first, let me explore those words, SMART and mission. And I'm going to start with mission. You know, mission generally means something that you're attempting to accomplish. And my mission for this program is to offer ideas and examples of those ideas in action to inspire you to take actions for yourself that will enhance and nurture your resilience so that you can achieve your potential. That mission drives me to find the best guests, whether they are the best in what they do or they touch on an important topic that is rarely explored. Spoiler alert, my guests today fill both of those criteria. More often, the term mission refers to an organization, a company, a team. The mission, as my guests define it, is a task with a defined purpose or objective, specifically missions undertaken by project teams, organizations, or societies. Now let's look at that word SMART. You know, SMART usually means that you have lots of facts in your head and you know how to call upon them, shuffle them up, and put them together to solve problems, to make decisions, and live your life. Putting SMART and mission together, who or what has the facts and who or what calls on them, shuffles them up, and puts them together to make decisions and solve problems? I know my guests will have that answer. Now, what questions would you like to ask my guests? We're going to take a short break now. And during that time, I want you to think about what questions would you like to ask my guests if you were sitting in my seat. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're listening to Unlocked. I'm your host, Madelyn Blair, and our guests today are Ed Hoffman and Larry Prusak, who'll be talking about the SMART mission. Ed and Larry, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you, Madelyn.
It's great to be here, Madelyn.
Oh, great. Well, I have to introduce the two of you formally, so just give me a minute. So if you're a regular listener of Unlocked, you already know Ed Hoffman, who retired from NASA as a senior executive. He was also the first NASA Chief Knowledge Officer and founder of the NASA Project Leadership Academy. Today, he's CEO of Knowledge Strategies and a senior lecturer at Columbia University of Professional Studies, School of Professional Studies. He is also a co-author of our featured book, The Smart Mission. Now, Larry Prusak is new to Unlocked and is someone I think it's almost impossible, Larry, to introduce you in detail. He has written numerous books, including Working Knowledge, which is one of the most important books on knowledge management. He has more videos than you can watch, even if you decide to binge watch. He's one of the most respected teachers at Columbia University's School of Professional Studies, which, if I speak truthfully, is to me the most important accolade I can offer. So instead of impressing you with long lists, I'll tell you a story. Now, in conversation with Larry, every time I mention a book or an article or a paper or a person, he'll say, oh, yes, because he's read it. He knows them. It's amazing. So I made it that my greatest achievement in life would be the day I mentioned something that was new to Larry. Now, in a special session at Columbia, he and I were talking about learning, and I introduced the book, Too Much to Know, by Dr. Ann Blair of Harvard. By the way, no relation to me. But I introduced it by actually running a video of me talking with her about her work. And Larry's response was that he wished he could take her class at Harvard on the subject. I decided, yay, I had achieved my mission, knowing that it's likely to be the only time I do. So students love Larry because he shares what he knows, not to convince you that he knows more. He does it just to let you know as well. So again, welcome you to Unlocked.
This is exciting. It's I'm here with two of my heroes. A lot of trust. There's a lot of fun over the years. So this is particularly exciting.
Same here.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Well, you know, one of the things I always like to do is have my guests talk about something that helps the audience see you in a fuller picture. So, you know, you've worked in knowledge, well, all of us have for many, many years. How did you get to this point? You know, how it's used, you know, how it can be better used. How did you find yourself studying and working with knowledge? Larry, why don't we begin with you?
I could actually answer that. It's an interesting story. My grandfather was an officer in the Russian army, in the Tsar's army. This is not out of the blue. This is related to what we're talking about. And he didn't speak English, but by the time I knew him, he came to America. And my father said he fought in the Russo-Japanese War. He was an officer. Russia and Japan had a war in 1905 in which the Japanese kicked the butts of the Russians. And I was astounded to hear this. My grandfather was a big, tough guy. I said, how did they lose to Japan? Japan's a small country, all these little islands. And that day when it's the 1950s, Russia was an enormous country. I said, you mean that huge country Russia lost to the small country Japan? Not only that, but all the Russians I knew in New York City were big people. They tend to be large people. The Japanese, I don't mean to be at all offensive, but were not known as giants, especially in 1905. I couldn't understand this. And my father, he couldn't explain it. Later on, I took a class in Asian history in college, and I learned that the Japanese had used knowledge to beat the Russians. They went all around the world finding munitions, understanding how the West made war, understanding the technology of war. So by the time they came to a war with Russia, Russia still had cavalry, with horses. The Japanese had Gatling guns, and they mowed them down. And I came to realize, a small person could beat a big person if they have knowledge. And I began thinking about knowledge a lot. And by the time I got into business, into management consulting, I was amazed that knowledge wasn't ever mentioned. There was always information and data. And I couldn't understand that. I said, well, anyone can get information, anyone can get data. You need to have the knowledge to do these things. So I got interested in knowledge. And then Tom Davenport and I were looking for a research subject when we were at Ernst & Young. I said, let's study knowledge because no one talks about it. Ernst & Young wanted to fire us for doing that. They didn't like the idea because they couldn't think of how to make money on knowledge. But we pursued it. So that's a long answer, but it's a true one.
Fabulous. Russian army.
Yeah, I mean,
he was a big guy. He was big.
To me, it's two different things, totally different, seemingly, Brooklyn and NASA. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. It was kind of a tough area that I grew up in. And I found out there are 3 ways you survive in Brooklyn. You can be tough and strong. I definitely wasn't. You could be fast and run out of things. Despite my legs, I wasn't that fast. Or you can make people smile. And I mean, I have all these stories, but sometimes just getting through the playground, going to a Brooklyn junior or high school bathroom could be a challenge. And so you had to talk to people. All kidding aside, I found out that you have different kinds of people, different ethnical backgrounds, different racial issues, and how you spoke to people and how you acquainted yourself with people and how you understood where they are and who you are, to me, was how do you survive successfully in the streets of Brooklyn. And then I got to NASA, having gone through the school of Brooklyn. I got into Columbia because I could talk. They asked me what I'm interested in. And I talked about teams and creating things and designing things. And I got to NASA. And I found what the real key issue was. You're dealing with brilliant people, talented people. It became clear to me very quickly, anytime you get 20 or 30 NASA people in a room, they can do anything great or anything bad, but they had all the capabilities. It's if they wanted to work effectively together. And to me, working effectively together really meant, do we want to tap into our collective capabilities, to really work effectively together, or do we want to compete with each other for ego reasons? So Brooklyn and NASA is what kind of waltzed me into this whole world of knowledge and learning and story and teaming. Yeah.
I love the contrast. Larry, your story was really focused on gaining knowledge. And Ed, I love the fact that yours was more in terms of the sharing of it. So.
I wanted to survive, all kidding aside. I was not a good fighter, and you'd get it. People would come up to you literally and say, why are you looking at me? Or did you say this? And you didn't say anything, but you started having a relationship.
Yeah.
And that to me was that sharing part to me was essential.
Great.
Ed grew up only about 2 miles from me, I might add. So whatever he said goes for me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, clearly both of you survived, and I'm very happy that you did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, your book, The Smart Mission, I'm curious. Now, I know we're going to get into the content, but I'm curious about why you decided to write the book and to write it as a collaborative activity. I mean, I've written books with other people, and it's not easy. So talk about that a little bit.
I think it's easy. I've written books also, a few by myself. I found it much easier to write with another person. The dialogue, the give and take. Ed and I and Matt Coet, the other author we had a good time. We would have discussions and bring up ideas and then look at what we had said. We recorded it. It was actually a lot of fun. I mean, it was hard work, but it was a lot of fun doing it together than staring at the screen, the blank screen. What am I going to say today? So I had a good time writing it. In fact, if I had any more energy, we'd write another one.
I mean, this is something I'll put out there. Larry knows for a long time, because I got to a point really in my life where I realized what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Larry. We were working together for a number of years at NASA, and the first time, truthfully, I saw Larry talk, the same reaction actually I had with you, Madelyn, in terms of your session on story. There are times you see someone the first time and you just lock in. And Larry was at one of our PM challenges, large forum event. He was talking to an audience of very smart, but very skeptical NASA scientists and engineers and managers. And he captivated them with the truth. And you both know what I'm talking about. There's a way that you can be smart and you're saying the right things, and the audience will kill you the way you're saying it. And then there's a way that you talk and you engage people. And whenever I would have a new speaker, I would talk to them. Don't do this because they will kill you. It doesn't matter if you're right. And Larry got up there and it was just like, this is really special. There's a connection. And it makes the learning better for people because it's a strange word, but there's a love, I think, that can happen with an audience and the writer or the presenter. And you get there, the trust opens up. And over the years, I've always watched Larry talk, and it doesn't matter. Whenever he presents, I get excited. The same story, I hear it a different way. And I did get to the point where I've had a really successful career at NASA. And what do you want to do? I wanted to be Larry. I told him that one day. And it was a beautiful, sunny, hot day. And I was in Florida. I will always remember it. Life was good. I was doing the NASA International Project Management course. And I get a call from Larry saying, basically, you've done a lot of great things, but you haven't done the book. And I said, that's true, Larry. I don't intend on. I'm a storyteller. I said, no, you got to talk. You got to do a book. And my response was, if I could do it with you, then I would have the courage to do that, because I'm a storyteller. I'm a talker. Solitary things, as you know, I don't like just doing things on my own. So there's a noise that fills my head. But writing the book with Larry and with Matt, I would have to say, was one of the joys of my life. It stunned me fairly early. I started, dear Lord, I'm loving this. I'm really writing. I'm liking writing, getting it to them, having the conversations, and so it was a joyful experience. And it started with Larry's phone call of, you got to do this.
This is amazing, because my experience with writing with other people was not characterized the way you describe it.
You got to write with us, Madelyn.
Well, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. I have a topic.
No, I think it's true. I mean, maybe this is me. I was always very emotional one at NASA and at Columbia where I worked. Try to keep that down in the early years. But for me, if you really care for people, if there's trust, if there's a sense of love in terms of the topic, the world issues, and the trust, then it happens naturally. And if it's too intellectual and too rational, then it becomes kind of painful, I think. So.
One factor I would add to that, and I think Ed would agree with me, he's so similar to me, is that I was always interested in show business. I mean, I couldn't go into show, but I didn't think I was talented enough. But I was always in. I go to plays, I go to concerts. I sort of like comedians, I like singers, and I noticed, how they did it. I was very into the technique they'd use. Could understand the art. Judy Garland once said, I go out on that stage and I know the audience. I could sense who they are. Frank Sinatra said that. And I said, I could do that. That's something I know how. You could just sort of go out and sense the audience. And that's a really valuable thing if you're going to do presentations. That's what Ed's talking about.
Yeah.
And in writing the book, we did this sort of similar thing. So what can we say that our audience would really like to hear? We knew who our audience would be. They'd be people like us, people like you, Madelyn, the people watching this show. So we'd sort of have a sense of what would they like to know and hear. I think that's invaluable. That's what Ed's sort of talking about. If you don't have that, you can be as smart as Einstein, but people are just, you're right, they doze off or they won't like it.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing here is really that interaction between you. And one of the things in your book that you talk about is that the culture, the environment in which a company exists is really critical to a smart mission. I wonder if you guys would expand on that a bit.
Go ahead, Ed. Maybe you could speak first.
I think it drives everything. I have a wonderful story. One of the best definitions, two definitions. One was academic. I think Shine, who said, culture is the way groups and societies solve their problems. So if something is being done over and over again, it may be strange to you, but it's the way it's worked at some point. And I worked for a number of years for the deputy administrator of NASA. Associate administrator was Jack Daly, General Jack Daly, who now I think heads up the Air and Space Museum. Long career there. Wonderful person. Wonderful, just delightful leader. Very, very warm, smart, directed, but very nice. I was doing a lot of work for him, and one day I said, you were the number 2 guy. You're the number 2 guy at NASA. You were the number 2 guy in the Marines, working for senior leaders who were difficult. I said, what's the difference about being a senior executive at NASA and in the military? And he said, really one thing. He answered it immediately. He said, both places you're dealing with very dedicated people, smart people, patriotic people, but the culture in one area is different. And he said, and he told me a story. He said, one morning I get to a plane hangar, for very early meetings I'm flying out to in the military. And it was a rainy day. It was kind of misty, overcast. And you go into the hangar and it's gray. And he turns to his aide and says, why do they always paint these things gray? It's cold. Why can't it be purple? Something that you came to and there's energy. You know where I'm going with this. He flies out. He comes back like 5:30 at night. The whole hangar has been painted purple. And he said he turned to his aide and said, what happened? He said, they heard you, sir. And he said what he learned as a senior leader in the military, be careful what you say, because that culture is responsive to when you say something as a leader, they act on it. Mm. He said, what I learned at NASA is if I give a direct order, it's seen as nothing more than an invitation for conversation. Mm-hmm. And anything less than that, they ignore me. So at NASA, he had to be thoughtful about what he was saying and somewhat directive to get the attention of the military. And he said that was really the only cultural calibration he had to do. But that was the power of culture, is that in one place, it's you listen to the hierarchy for good reasons. And in another, it's not hierarchical. It's more of a university kind of conglomerate. And I never forgot that story. To me, that's culture.
Someone once said that to understand the culture, it's the way people act when nobody is looking at them, which is true. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah. I agree completely. I think culture is, of all the things we wrote about in that book, that might be the most critical. I mean, if the culture is bad or toxic or too hierarchical, nothing else good will happen. It's like the overwhelming hegemony. It's the thing that runs everything else. I've worked for firms where the culture was awful. I mean, I worked for them. I worked in firms where the culture was awful, and they don't get anywhere. I mean, they just, can just about survive if they have products that people buy, but no one likes working there. On the other hand, you go to firms where the culture is lively. It's just like NASA. I love working with Ed and NASA because people really, they had a mission. They were smart. They got along. I mean, maybe they'd argue, but you could really sense this was a really good place to work. And people didn't leave. They all could probably earn more money working for Boeing or McDonald's, but they didn't. They don't leave, which is a very good sign.
Which is a very good sign. I agree. Attrition rates are a real signal of
yes,
how people are feeling about their work.
I left after 33 years. I was in my late 50s. And to this day, which is like 6 years later, people say, why'd you leave so soon? Yeah.
Well, let's say that you're somebody in an organization who doesn't feel things are really quite the way they could be. And let's say that you're a manager. So what do you do about that? How do you build something in there that makes it more, I'll call it productive?
Well, one thing is, I've told my students that good behavior migrates. If you really do something interesting and productive and valuable, other people notice it and it gets picked up. I mean, I think, you can't always hope, I'm going to join this firm and I'm going to change the culture. That's never going to happen. But if you do things really well, you trust your employees, you do innovative things, you act in a way that you want other people to act, it migrates, it gets picked up. There's a Protestant hymn, bright in the corner where you are. And I think that makes sense. Just do what you think is right, and good behavior will migrate. Now, there are other places where even the good behavior won't migrate, but I've seen that happen, though. Act the way you want others to act, what Kant called the categorical imperative, act that way, and sometimes it gets picked up. So that's the best you can do. You're not going to change the culture of it unless you get to be CEO. And by the time people get to be CEOs, they don't want to change the culture because they got them to the top and they don't want to change it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would get this question going back to my NASA years. Probably my favorite time at NASA was when I was doing the leadership development or the project engineering courses, because you'd be with the students for a week, 2 weeks residential. And one of the things that always irritated me was individuals who would say, the problem is there, it's above us.
Right.
And I'd say, you're NASA engineers, project managers, people in the world see you as leaders. People would fight, they would kill to have your jobs in terms of things. So you have to accept the fact that you create your own space. And the research I've always read is the direct leader has the most impact on the culture of a team. So if I work for you, Madelyn, directly, then you have the greatest influence of how I feel, my engagement, my growth, how I feel things. It's not the person above you or removed from you. And so I think it's important for an individual, for a manager, to recognize that the greatest influence, they are having the greatest influence on their people. And if they can't do the things they need to do to create the kind of environment that they need, then my recommendation, frankly, is to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, then you're not happy and your people will see that. But the good news is if you have a little bit of freedom, you can create some positives from your own space. And that's been proven by research.
Well, this is interesting because when I was a division chief at the World Bank, that was one of the things I did. In fact, I saw my role as a buffer to keep all the nonsense of the big organization out of my division. And then I could really allow my division to be what it needed to be. And it was very successful until we had a major change in administration, and they wouldn't allow, they made it so that I couldn't even do that. And that's when I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's the time to leave. Yeah. That was also with the 33 years. I told the chief engineer who I reported to, Ralph Rowe, wonderful leader. I really liked him, but that I was feeling that there was more administrative stoppage points towards the end of my career. I wasn't explaining things to engineers or project people or leaders. I was doing things because of someone not really connected with what needed to be done as an outcome. So it became easier at that point to leave and to try to be Larry Prusak.
I have to say one thing about this. I think our students often would say, I want to be a Larry. And I had a chance one time to tell them what they needed to do. And it's the kind of thing that the camera goes off and then you go, oh, I should have said this. And all I should have said was just start reading and never stop reading. Am I right, Larry?
That's pretty close. Yeah. Pretty close, Madelyn.
Yeah. Well, speaking of this aspect of learning, I've been very interested in learning for years and years that I've worked in that area. But I really would like to hear your thoughts because you talk about that in your book. And I think it relates back to the culture, but let's just talk about learning and your thoughts about at the organizational level and how does it relate to individual learning?
Well, Ed, should I tell them that amoeba story?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe you leave out the organization name, but
no, I once worked for a very, very large and powerful organization, and they had offices and facilities around the world. And I was invited to give a talk at the Royal Institute of Technology at Melbourne, Australia. And I hadn't been to Melbourne, so I took up the offer. And this firm I was working with, I said, I'm going to be in Australia. I wrote to the head of the firm in Australia. I'm going to be in Australia. I'd be happy to visit some of your clients. I'm going to be here. My way is being paid by the university. And I said, I'm going to be speaking about learning. And the head of this company in Australia wrote back and said, we're really not that interested in learning here. And it happened to be on the way home after I got his mail, I was reading Scientific American. I had a subscription then, and there was an article in that very issue about how amoebas learn to tell the difference between salt water and fresh water. So I wrote this man back. I said, even amoebas are interested in learning. You're telling me one of the biggest companies in the world isn't interested in learning, but the amoebas are? I mean, come on. I thought I'd be fired, but I wasn't. But I never heard back from them. If your organization discourages learning, if they don't want you to go to conferences, if they don't want you to read on the job, if they don't talk about articles and books, forget it. This is a very hyper-competitive world we're living in.
Mhm.
Everyone knows this. It's the democratization of knowledge has made the world astoundingly competitive. Ed and I are working these days for a big chip company, and it's very, very competitive, the world of chips. I mean, they have to be constantly learning, constantly understanding the technology. You have to do that. You're going to sink. It's just the way the world has developed, the international economy and the democratization of knowledge. You can't count on, oh, my country knows this and we have a monopoly. That was true when I was a little boy. No longer true in this world. You have to continuous learning. Now, the question is, and I get asked this all the time, and so does Ed, I'm sure you do. I don't have time. My hair's on fire. I can't read. I can't do this. So, well, your value is going to drop, and you won't know why. Every day you don't learn things. Every week, every month, your value is less to yourself and to your organization. Make the time. I do it. Consultants do it. You guys do it. You just have to do it. And some people do and some don't. Those who do get ahead. Those who don't, they never know why they never got ahead.
Yeah. It's, I think in ways your work Unlocked, Madelyn, is heavily geared towards the individual. For me, myself, understanding the blockages, the different activities, the ways to move forward, the inspirations, the dreams. We've had this discussion because of working at NASA. I had to take that in terms of the team or the organizational level. And I think the thing that I learned over the years, maybe the decades, is learning is very scary, because learning basically means you have to acknowledge you don't have the answers. And one of the things I've seen, you can go into the audience can go into any of the failure reports, really the big ones, Columbia shuttle disaster, Challenger's shuttle disaster. And you'll see that there were answers there, or at least there were things that needed to be done to raise questions and explore things, but it was shot down. And I've been in the rooms where leaders make decisions to stop the conversation. It usually comes at a core of there's a fear, or there's an ego that if we explore this, we're going to find things we don't want to find. The people, when I was starting the NASA Academy, part of what we were developing was a certification. What are the competencies for an outstanding project leader? The people who loved that whole notion were the young people. And they would say, Ed, how come this isn't required? How come these courses aren't required? And I spoke to enough mature people who've been around for a while, and some of them would say, what's in it for me to acknowledge that there are new capabilities that I have to learn? That's giving the advantage to someone who's totally new and young. And so I think that's part of it, that learning and unlearning really leads to a lot of emotions that we haven't been prepared to deal with. And at the core, it's the notion we're supposed to fool everybody. They're even people who will tell you how to you have all the answers.
Right.
And so most of the times we don't have the answers. You have to get help from others. And that's that's seen as a vulnerability. I think that's one of the biggest issues. And it lends itself to the time issue. I've worked with projects that were failing and say, we need to do things differently. I said, okay, let's do this. Give me a few hours. Oh, I don't have a few hours for learning. I said, well, but you're going to fail. He says, yeah, then we'll be given time to learn. It's like, but these things are really, I think, connected in how we're raised as a society. Bring me the solution. Don't bring me the problem.
Yeah, exactly right. It's also true that nobody can know everything, and no organization can know all they need to know. Right. It's just not possible. That's right. You ever take a look at how much is produced, how much knowledge is produced every year in this world? I've seen some estimates of that, and it's a spectacular number, especially now that China and India are totally integrated into the global economy. It's 40% of the population of the world are in those two countries, and they're producing and producing. So there's so much technical knowledge, so much, all sorts of knowledge being produced that you really have to be aware of. And no one can know everything. I've worked for 5 or 6 firms that thought they were the best and the brightest, that they didn't need Harvard. They felt if they didn't know something, it wasn't knowledge. Some of the intelligence agencies, the World Bank, Madelyn, you know this as well as me, even NASA, people were like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's no longer true. And they don't believe that anymore. The organizations.
Complacency goes before the fall. That's another way of saying it.
That's
You know,
right.
most people, when things are going well at NASA, they're comfortable. That's when I would get most nervous because I was used to working with teams saying, I'd ask a simple question sometimes, you know, what are the weaknesses here? What are the problems? And whenever I'd get a manager or a leader who say, oh, I can't think of any problems here, I'd say, oh my God, I mean, I'm in a Vincent Price horror movie and you know it's going to be how bad it is.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the ironies is that when you have a leader who really is a good leader, it's one that can sit in ambiguity where they don't know all the answers. In fact, the answers may not even exist at the moment, and yet they're able to function. And this aspect of not wanting to learn is sort of like nothing could ever be that unknown.
You know, Montaigne, the great French essayist, said that any successful man over 50 never listens to anyone else.
What'd you say?
Right.
Well,
thank goodness I'm a woman. I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's the advantage. See, the great thing, what other podcasts can you be a part of where you hear about, you know, not only organizations learning, but also Montaigne?
I know. Yes, the producers of our show always say this is a slightly different show than others.
Yeah.
Oh my. Well, let's see. We've talked about learning now. So let's come back to the book. Is there anything that I mean, I told you my 2 big areas of interest, but is there any other thing that you want to make sure that our audience hears about this amazing book?
Well, the only thing I would say, Ed and I are constantly talking about and reading about the whole world of intangibles. I mean, all the things in that book are intangibles. You can't really measure knowledge, learning, culture. I mean, you can observe it and you can talk about it, but it's a hard thing to measure. And they're intangibles. You know, you can't touch them, you can't smell them, but they're there and they're very powerful. And more, we're beginning to read about how even Wall Street's getting interested in understanding the intangible values in organizations. There's 2 books that recently came out on this. And we think it's a very important subject. The book fits into that area of intangibles, culture, knowledge, learning, teaming, all the things we talk about. And people, because it can't be measured and because it's not taught in the business schools, and because we're so obsessed now with data and AI, they ignore this stuff. And this stuff is what makes the world go round. It really does. We think it's ultimately the most important thing. But there's a book written years ago called Techno-Utopianism in American Life. And I read that book years ago. And in the United States and some of the countries that emulate the United States, there's a very strong sense of techno-utopianism. All problems can be solved by more technology, more analytics. Now, I'm not against any of those things. I use the technology. Obviously, we're doing all that, but it doesn't solve a lot of the problems we're talking about. It really doesn't. Today's New York Times, it's interesting, headline, math scores in the United States are falling like a stone.
Yeah.
Now, talk about intangibles.
Yeah.
Why is that happening? What's happened to learning? I mean, I wasn't very good at math, but certainly it was emphasized that this is an important subject when I was in school. Yeah, I mean, I knew it was important. I just didn't have a natural talent for it. Man, it's really, and even reading is dropping. So, I mean, it's really important. And yet we're so obsessed with various mechanical, to put a better word.
Well, because we can measure it.
Yes, that's exactly right. You can measure it. That's right, Madelyn.
Yeah.
And often there's a comfort I've heard several managers telling me this. I was looking at something that they were measuring, and it didn't make any sense. And I stayed in the room after other people, and I went to one of the younger guys. I said, "What is this stuff?" He said, "Oh, these are measures." in terms of, I said, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. He turned and whispered, he looked around, he said, they don't make sense to anybody. And I said, they don't make sense to anybody. They have to make, he says, no, we bring clients into the room and they never ask questions. They assume that we're measuring stuff and all these charts. And he said, when we look at it, they really don't measure anything of importance, but we keep it here because it indicates that we're committed to measurement. And, there's a lot of things you can measure that do provide help. But part of this goes back to your question of what's the major thing. The question that I get all the time is, how do you create a smart mission? How do you create a successful organization? And the problem is that a lot of people are looking for a specific, this is the way you do it. And I can tell you how effective projects, have done it here. You can talk about effective situations in the World Bank, but they're always different. And the ambiguity and the differences in the change in the context means that as individuals, as teams, we have to come together and create our own environment. That's one around learning. That's one around valuing knowledge. That encourages people who are telling us things we don't want to hear to respect that. Respecting cultural differences, taking time to understand it, sharing stories. These are all things that, it's not like you can immediately measure, hey, we're doing storytelling. Immediately we're getting this outcome of it. And yet the most effective leaders, systems engineers, organizations do it. So you have to figure out for your environment, which of these things do you want to start with? And then how do you find what works for you? There are things that we did at NASA that you could take another place, they wouldn't be as effective. But I think that's the problem. People want a Cliff Notes that tells you this is what you need to know. And that's just not the world. Fortunately or unfortunately, the world is very ambiguous and changing. It comes in many different colors. And it requires the ability to adapt and create these concepts for yourself. So it's not the easy answer that people want. And I think that's the problem.
I think we have been somewhat deluded. Going back to your point, Larry, about the technology, we've been deluded into thinking that we are machines as well.
Yes.
And when you're a machine, then there's a yes, no.
That's
But
right.
We're not. We're not.
Yeah.
We're much
It's not
more
a toggle
complex.
switch. Yeah. It's not a toggle switch.
No.
Off and on and off. And or we try to make people machines. It's the balance between what I saw again at NASA is a place with many standards and policies. And that's good. It represents accumulated knowledge. But if you lock people into, you can only use these processes. You won't see that at NASA because they recognize the situation changes. You adapt off of it. And it's as bad, maybe worse, where you get someone who's just locked into blindly following a process as it is to someone who doesn't understand it in the first place. But it's that need for a formula. And humans aren't around formulas. They pride themselves. I know smart friends who they fill out surveys and they deliberately mislead with their responses because they don't like the notion of thinking that you know the answers for things. So
well,
complex.
In the 1950s, when computers were really coming on board, Herbert Simon and others said, yes, the human mind is like a computer. Yeah. And he got the Nobel Prize. I mean, so people began it was really a strong movement that, our brains are like, large analog computers. There's absolutely no truth to that whatsoever. That's right. And yet it's still there. People still feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I cannot believe it, but we're coming to the end.
Already?
But there's a question.
I thought we just got started.
I know.
we need another couple of hours at least.
We need another show. That's right. Okay. There's one question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to always come back. I always, if you have some final words. But what I'd like to ask you now is, we have people who are just starting their careers or maybe moving into a new career. I mean, our students at Columbia are starting into a new career as they study. What is something that you can say to them? Here is a strategy. Here is an approach, something that they can take into their lives and say, okay, here's an idea that I think I will begin to work on it to prepare myself to be able to accomplish SMART missions?
That's a good question, Madelyn. I would say really learn to be adaptive. The world is changing drastically. I mean, radical uncertainty, which is really the basis of what Ed and I and Matt were talking about, undergirding everything, is learn to be really adaptive. If something doesn't work, try something else. And part of that is constantly learning, adapt, and learn something new, learn to do something differently. I can't imagine. I mean, I have two children who were in their, midst of their learning, midst of their career life. And I'm telling them, you don't like this, try that. You don't understand this, learn something new. I mean, it's really, it wasn't always that way. Both my parents worked for the government, and they had government jobs. They stayed there just like 30, 40 years, and that was that. And a lot of my friends, that parents had jobs, they just stayed in it. That's all gone. The world is so different. So you really have to learn to adapt. And one of the great tools of adaptation is learn, read, talk to people, conversation, constantly network, build your networks, talk to people. That would be I think I do give the students advice like that.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, so one, I would point to the poster. My favorite NASA poster is right behind me. It says, challenge traditions.
Yes.
What I like about that is it represents, you can't stay successful doing the same thing. We have to adapt in our relationships in terms of how we stay as friends, in terms of working together. The other thing I would always say to students, but also, going back to my NASA years, if you don't remember anything else that you've heard here, treat people with respect and inclusion.
Yeah.
And what I meant by that is, we want to be respected. All people want to be respected. So figure out what you need. Doesn't mean you have to agree. I've seen people argue and shout and all that, as long as there's an underlying feature of respect. And inclusion means that if you're part of a relationship and a team, make sure that people are being checked in with. And generally, if you have somebody in the team you don't want to hear from, then you should be honest about not being a part of the team. I think that's a foundational thing. I'll close related to this with one of the stories in the book that we loved. Had to do with a ventilator project that NASA JPL was doing for developing ventilators prototypes. It's a wonderful story by the Vital Project. But one of the principles that they had that I'd never heard before, that I've adopted, I loved, is be comfortable being ignorant until you are not. Be comfortable being ignorant until you are not. When I spoke to them about that, they recognized they needed to be comfortable learning new things, learning from experts from outside of their organization. And they basically said, let's be comfortable with what we don't know until we know it, know what we need. And I think that's where I would end, I guess, with some of my thoughts.
Fabulous. I am just filled with delight that we were able to have this conversation, because these lessons, learn to be adaptable, be comfortable being ignorant. I love this. So often people would be embarrassed to ask a question, and I say there's nothing wrong with ignorance.
No, we all are. He's right. We all are ignorant.
We are, and you have to express the question. Well, alas, we are out of time, but normally I would give you the last words, but I think you really both have given your last words in terms of what your message is to our audience, unless there's something you just feel compelled that you must share before we sign off.
We got to do more of this. That's what that's what I'm saying. When we should go on the road together.
All right. It's a deal.
It's been a pleasure, Madelyn. It's always nice talking with you.
Oh, likewise, Larry. Thank you so much, Ed. As always, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madelyn. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Ed.
Wow. I am just bubbling with new ideas, because I just can't stop thinking about what these two amazing people have shared. This aspect of learn to be adaptable. I keep thinking about that in relationship to resilience. And one of the things that a highly resilient person is they know who they are. And when you know who you are, you can be adaptable, because you know that the little wind coming from over here is not going to blow you over because you're rooted in the earth. It's just wonderful. Learn to be adaptable and being comfortable, being ignorant. Wow. 2 fantastic lessons. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. And if you have, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, please click that like button. Better yet, subscribe or follow me. And you might check out my book, Unlocked, and The Smart Mission. Some of you have asked if I mentor individually, and the answer is yes. I have done it for years, so just drop me an email. And if you want to do it in a group setting, just tell me that. I'm very happy to arrange and let you know when the next group session is scheduled. And of course, if you have questions about this show, email them to me at madelyn@madelynblair.com. And if I can't answer them, I'll get Ed or Larry to do so. Replays of this show can be found on my website, madelynblair.com/unlockedtv. And just scroll down and you'll see all the replays from the show. So thank you very much for joining us on this segment of Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.